Welcome, guys, to Relationship Hub, and we are still on the topic sexual desires and sexual feeling before and after. And so, I hope you guys listened to my other video where I talked about teen sex, and today we are going to talk about marriage and sex because it's very important. Most marriages don't last because of lack of intimacy, and so we are not really going to be talking about intimacy that much. We are not really going to be talking about sex that much, but I think we are going to be talking about marriage in sex. And so you can't separate marriage and sex because they both come together. I always go back to Genesis. When Adam came together with Eve, because it was said Adam made love with his wife Eve. And so that's how it's supposed to be. That's how it's supposed to look like. They have to be a union. They have to be a coming together. That is what marriage is. I hear people saying marriage is a partnership, but I don't think marriage is a partnership. Because if marriage is a partnership, that's the reason why most marriages don't last. Because if marriage is a partnership, then you can just decide you wake up one morning and be like, I want a different partner. I don't want I'm tired of the other partner. And then you say, okay, let's file for a divorce. And that's why many marriages don't last. Marriage is not an organization, marriage is not a company. These are where you have partners. So marriage, and for many of us, most especially women, marriage, you can't have two equal like equal individuals in a marriage. One has to be bigger than the other. Check out Jay-Z and Beyonce, for instance. I think Beyonce's net worth, I think, is around 1 billion, and Jay-Z's is around 3 billion. I think 2.8 billion. You see, and okay, check out Jay-Z and Beyonce's marriage, for instance. That is a union. They are still together. I think with the rumor that was piling up, back then, that people were saying Jay-Z was cheating, and though it was a public, everyone knew about the story, but yet they still stayed together. That is marriage. Please, people should take a page from their life, so that they will understand what marriage truly is. Because when people talk about marriage, let's say for instance, because what I was hearing when that news came out, people were like, most especially women, they were like, "What are you doing with this type of guy? He's not even that handsome. What is Beyonce doing with this guy? After everything that he has done to her, how come she's still with him?" Because these are things that most people don't understand. Now we don't know their story. We don't know what they've been through together. You understand? Like she says, she doesn't like putting her personal life outside. And so you understand, but this has had to come out. And so you don't know what they've been through. You don't know, if Jay-Z has supported her in so many ways. You don't know if she has supported Jay-Z in so many ways. And so because of what Jay-Z did, they will just throw away, a relationship that they have been building for so long. That is true marriage. Marriage is not something that when one thing happens, you just run away. You have just been together for just a year or maybe 5 months, and then something happened. You say, okay, I want a divorce, or you say love is not enough, so stuff like this. Please, guys, let's go and learn from Beyonce and Jay-Z's marriage, because that is a marriage. And please, guys, a man and a woman can't be at the same, there can't be that equality. And so in every marriage, a man has to be higher. There's no equality. I'm not the one saying it. If you go to the Bible, it's there in Genesis. Now, though before, like it was said, Eve came as a companion, Eve came as a helper. So you are meant to help, to support your man, to help your man, to make him, feel good, put him at the right direction. That's your job as a woman. And also as a man too, your job is to respect your woman and listen to your woman. And many women think that it's just, we are now at the same level, so we can be at the same level. No, if you want to be at the same level with your husband, there's going to be problem. It was like that before, until we all know what happened with Eve and everything. And so God, proclaimed that punishment for Eve, and that's why, there's nothing, a woman will always desire, a woman will always be beneath a man. That's the punishment. That's how it is always going to be. And so women should always try hard to support their man, be there for their man. That is marriage. Marriage is not a partnership. It's not a business, because if you treat marriage as a business, then so sex in this in all this marriage and everything has to be very important. Like let's say for instance there was a story. Let me tell a very short story. Now there were some a couple of like young guys, more a man and a woman. They were around 20 or so. And so, sometimes they go on dates, they were in a relationship, they go on dates and stuff like that. And so, but the girl normally stays with her parents, and the guy owns his own place. So sometimes she will come to his place and stay maybe like 1 or 2 days. And it may seem as though they are married. That's what the girl assumed, that's how marriage is. But then again, there are romance and, there are fairy tales and stuff like that. Like I always say, I believe in arranged marriage than in fantasy. Like going on dates or romance. I think that's just a waste of one's time, because that's not even how you're gonna get to know someone that you want to be with. Arranged marriage, through that process, you tend to learn about each other. In the marriage, I think that is definitely a good idea. So guys, tell me what you think. Would you prefer an arranged marriage, or would you prefer romantic, getting to know each other, stuff like that? So let's go back to the story. And so they were going on dates, and they were in a relationship, blah blah blah. So eventually they got married, and it wasn't as easy as they thought it was, because they started having issues like 2 3 months after the marriage. The woman was not comfortable with the man. Sometimes he goes to use the bathroom, and he makes the place so disgusting. And sometimes the woman don't really know how to cook, and when she cooks she leaves the kitchen disgusting, and so many other issues and problems. And so they got tired of each other. But though eventually, they got pregnant, and they had a kid. And so the love came back a little bit because of that kid. But 2 3 4 months after the birth of that kid, they went back to that, having the same issues and the same problem. But for 2 3 months, they were not having sex. Now there's something we call the post. I don't know, post something for women after childbirth. They go through these changes in their body, and sometimes it might affect them, mentally. And so, at some point, the woman was not really, giving the man that much attention. But though they were having sex, but not quite regularly. And so sometimes they will have sex like once in a month, sometimes once in 2 months. But then again, eventually, and so they had their second kid. They came back together. They were talking, and but then 2 3 months later, after the second kid, they went back to their normal, arguing and screaming and shouting. And so at the end of the day, you understand, the man wasn't really having sex again. Before, he used to have sex once in a month, twice in a month, but this time around he wasn't even having sex. So it took 8 9 months without sex. And so it got to a point where the man was feeling a bit, tired and a bit overwhelmed. We men, sometimes men love to feel, a woman's touch, feel a woman's presence. And so he was feeling a bit, he was lacking that intimacy. They were not talking, they were not interacting with each other, they were not even having sex. And so eventually, well, we all know what would happen next. And so his friend invited him to a party, so he went to a bar. I don't know whether it's a brothel, or perhaps I think it's a bar or something like that. And so he was alone, and his friend left him, and so he was alone. And so a woman walked towards him. A girl, she was a prostitute. She walked towards him. Then she started exchanging words with him. She greeted him. She asked him how he was doing, and she was, and when he saw how kind she was, when he saw how brave she was, she reminded him of his wife back then, when she was still young, and they were still, going through that romantic phase. And and so, he felt like, someone really was there with him. And so she asked him how he was doing, and then the last thing she did was that she offered herself to him. That's the one thing the wife have not done, like the wife have not done for almost 8 months. And so he was, at some point he never wanted to give in to that seduction. But then again, please guys, if you are a man just like him, what are you gonna do? Tell me what are you gonna do at that situation? Because you've not had sex for almost 9 months. And then he remembered going back home. And so, but when he remembered going back home, he realized that if he goes back home, he's not even gonna get any action because his wife is just all over the place and she wasn't looking that attractive any longer. And so she wasn't really taking care of herself again, because they were not having sex. So she felt like, she was okay. And maybe the man was okay. But she never knew that he was not okay. He was going through so much. And so he was always there asking her how she was doing, but she never asked him how he was doing. And so that's why women, please, you guys need to always, ask your man how he's doing. Because sometimes men go through a lot, but they just hide it because of the society, hide those pressures. And so the man at that moment, he never wanted to have sex with the lady. It's just that at that particular moment, he was feeling so alone, and then he gave in to that seduction, and then he eventually had sex. I think that will be the end of the marriage, right? I think so, because of lack of intimacy, because of lack of sex. Because I tell you that that man wasn't even looking for he wasn't looking for sex. He was just looking for something more. Because most men, when they go to this place like this brothel, this place where like a bar, sometimes they are not just going there because they want to have sex. Sometimes they go there so that they could engage in a conversation because their wife and no longer giving them that conversation. And so most men you find they are married men. Most men you find they are married men. They are not really. They are. It's not just about sex. They are looking for attention, so they could talk to. And so guys, please, this is just a short story for those who are married. It's very important that as a man, you respect your woman. As a woman, you support your man, and then sex needs to be something that has to be at the middle, at the center of every relationship. Because Adam said, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. And so, guys, if you guys enjoyed this, I think this is the episode 5, right? Yes, marriage and sex. So please, guys, share this to those who are married. Share this to those who are about to get married. Please, you shouldn't make those type of mistakes. Like I always say, Loshiba, please go and listen to my other series, which I call Loshiba. You understand that desires, just like what happened to Jay Z and Beyonce, sometimes you have flaws, right? Sometimes the flaws are there, but you guys have to work together to build back that relationship. Not just about saying, okay, I want to fight for it, divorce. And so those desires will be there. Like I said, desires are the reason why we make so many mistakes. Desires are the reason why the world is like this. Everyone desires. So sometimes you make mistakes, but then coming together to build something different. Make your relationship stronger. That's marriage. So please, guys, let's share this to those who are married, singles, and always remember, guys, to stay tuned for my next video because I'm about to talk more. So thank you for listening and have a wonderful day.